frost on the window glass. That's the first thing I remember about that morning. The pattern spreading across it like a crack in something that already broke months ago. Cold light slid low over 60 acres of ridgeland outside Pocahontas County, catching on bare oak branches and the sagging tin roof of a cabin nobody but me remembered still existed. A stack of papers sat on the kitchen table in front of me, 3 inches thick, held down at one corner by a chipped coffee mug so the wind coming through the bad weather stripping wouldn't scatter them. Settlement papers. Every page a small surrender. I didn't cry. I want to say that plainly because people expect the crying part, and I never gave it to anyone, not even myself. I flipped to page 1. Priscilla wanted the house. Not because she loved it, she never had, but because leaving with it meant leaving with a win, something she could point to. The negotiations happened over a conference table that smelled like burnt coffee and printer toner, Hawthorne sitting beside her in a charcoal suit that cost more than my truck payment. "She's not asking for anything unreasonable," Hawthorne said, sliding a folder toward my attorney. "Just what's fair." "Fair," I repeated. Not a question, just the word, set down flat, so he'd know I heard it and didn't believe it. Priscilla didn't look at me during that meeting. She looked at the folder, at her own fingernails, at the clock on the wall behind my head. Anywhere but my face. I'd spent 11 years learning her face the way I learn a boundary line, degree by degree, and that morning, it told me nothing at all. I signed page 1. The house went to her. Growing up, my father used to say a man who talks too much in a negotiation has already lost it. I carried that into the surveying business, and I carried it into that room. Every acre I ever staked out, I staked out in silence first, walked the line before I said a word about where it should fall. Marriage should have worked the same way. It didn't, not with Priscilla, who wanted every asset itemized, valued, notarized, and signed before she'd believe it was real. "I want the retirement accounts split according to the actuarial table," she said, and her voice had that clipped courtroom precision she used when she'd already rehearsed the sentence in a mirror. "Not an estimate, the actual table." "I'll get the table." She got the table. She got the number on it, too. 61% of 14 years of freelance survey contracts, county easement work, and every long winter I spent running a GPS rover across frozen ground so some developer could subdivide a hayfield. I signed page 2 without asking her to explain why she needed to win that badly. I already knew. Winning was the only language left between us that still felt like conversation. This page took longest to sign. Every custody weekend Priscilla didn't take from me on paper, she'd already taken in practice. Soccer tournaments scheduled on my Saturdays, a family emergency at her sister's the one weekend I had my daughter for her birthday. By the time it reached paper, the paper was just catching up to what she'd already built. I remember Hawthorne leaning back in his chair that day, tapping his pen against the table in a rhythm that made my jaw tighten. "Perry, you understand the parenting plan reflects the child's established routine," he said, like routine was a thing that built itself and not a thing Priscilla engineered one canceled weekend at a time. "I understand exactly what it reflects," I said. He smiled, thin and satisfied, the way a man smiles when he thinks silence means surrender. It didn't. It never does with me. I've stood on land in a sleet storm for 4 hours waiting for a satellite lock on a benchmark because the client needed the legal description accurate to the inch, and I've learned patience is not the same thing as giving up ground. I signed the parenting plan, 2 weekends a month, alternating holidays, and a Wednesday dinner if her schedule allowed it. Then I flipped to page 4, and that's where the stack, for the first time, didn't have anything for her to take. Page 4 was blank of her name entirely. 60 acres up a logging road that hadn't seen a grader in a decade. A one-room cabin my grandfather built with his own 2 hands and a borrowed chainsaw, back when a section corner still meant something you marked with a stone pile instead of a satellite fix. Nobody in the settlement, not Priscilla, not Hawthorne, not even my own attorney, knew to ask. There was a key for it, small, brass, worn smooth on one edge from 40 years riding in my grandfather's coat pocket, and then, after he passed, riding in mine. I kept it on a nail by the door of my apartment, and some nights I'd just look at it and think about the smell of wood smoke and cut pine that cabin held, even in August. Priscilla asked about it exactly once, years before the divorce, driving past the turnoff on the way to somewhere else. "What's up there?" she said, nodding toward the logging road. "Nothing worth the drive," I told her. She believed me. That's the part I've turned over the most since. Not that I lied, but that she never once pushed on it, never once wondered why a man who measured land for a living would call 60 acres nothing. The mediation ran 4 months. 4 months of Hawthorne producing documents, Priscilla producing demands, and me producing exactly what was legally required, and not one sentence more. My attorney, a quiet woman named Dorset, who chewed peppermints instead of talking during pauses, told me once in the hallway outside the courthouse that I was the calmest client she'd ever represented in a contested divorce. "You're not fighting for anything," she said. It wasn't quite a compliment. "I'm fighting for the one thing nobody's asking about. That's different." She didn't push either. Nobody ever pushes on the thing you don't offer up first. Priscilla's final ask came on page 5, a request for an inventory of any and all real property held individually or jointly, including undisclosed holdings. Standard language. Boilerplate a paralegal drops into every settlement packet without thinking twice. I signed it, because the cabin wasn't held individually or jointly. Here's the thing about a meets and bounds description, the kind surveyors used before GPS coordinates made everybody lazy, is that it only means something if you know where to start walking. Start from the wrong monument, and every bearing after it is wrong too, no matter how carefully you measure the angles. My grandfather, 3 years before he died, sat me down at this very kitchen table and told me he'd put the cabin and the land under it into a trust, not in my name, not in his, a family trust, drawn up quiet by a lawyer 2 counties over, naming me trustee and beneficiary both, with instructions that it never touch a divorce decree, a bankruptcy filing, or any woman who asks about it before she's earned it. "She'll ask eventually," he'd said, not unkindly, just certain. "Everybody does. When she does, you tell her the truth, just not before." I didn't understand him then. I understood him completely the day Hawthorne slid across a spousal disclosure affidavit and asked me under oath to list all property in which I held any interest, legal or equitable. I read the trust document again that night. Alone, the cabin key sitting beside it on the table, catching the one working bulb in the kitchen. Legally, a trust asset isn't marital property if it predates the marriage and was never commingled, and my grandfather had made sure of that, down to the last clause, decades before Priscilla and I ever met. I hadn't hidden anything. I'd simply never owned the thing everyone assumed I owned outright. I signed the affidavit truthfully. The cabin never appeared on it because it was never mine to disclose. It belonged to a trust that outlived my grandfather and would outlive this marriage too. The final page was a quitclaim, transferring my interest in the marital home to Priscilla outright, no strings, no liens, effective on filing. Hawthorne had already highlighted the signature line in yellow. "This closes it out," he said. "Once this is filed, there's nothing left on the table." "There's nothing left on the table," I agreed. Priscilla finally looked at me then, really looked, the way she used to across a dinner table before every conversation became a negotiation. "You didn't fight for any of it," she said. Not angry, almost curious. "You didn't fight for any of it. Not the house, not the savings, nothing." "I fought for the parts that mattered." "None of it mattered to you?" "Some of it did, just not the parts you were fighting for." She didn't ask what I meant. Hawthorne slid the pen across the table, and I signed my name for the last time on a document with hers on it, and that was the end of 11 years reduced to 6 pages and a coffee mug holding them flat against a draft. Spring came slower that year than it should have, but it came. I drove the logging road for the first time in months, gravel popping under the tires, and parked where the trees opened up just enough to see the cabin sitting exactly where it always had. Tin roof, rusted at the seams, porch boards soft in one corner, the whole structure leaning into the hillside like it was tired, but not done. I stood at the door with the brass key in my palm, turned it over once, felt the worn edge catch against my thumb the way it always had. The lock stuck for a second, then it gave. Inside smelled like cedar and dust and something under both of those. Wood smoke that had soaked into the walls so deep 40 years couldn't shake it loose. I spent that whole first weekend just walking the property line with my own equipment, resetting a benchmark near the old spring house, running a fresh azimuth off the section corner my grandfather had marked with a stone pile before I was even born. Not for a client, not for a survey plat anybody would ever file. Just because it was mine, and I wanted to know exactly where it started and where it ended. My daughter came up the second weekend I had custody, climbing the porch steps 2 at a time, asking why nobody ever told her this place existed. "It's new to us," I told her, "old to the land." She liked that answer better than the truth would have been. Maybe someday I'll give her the longer version, the trust, the quitclaim, the 6 pages of a marriage ending on a kitchen table 3 counties from here. For now, the cabin's got a new roof going up before winter, a wood stove I found secondhand in Elkins, and a key that doesn't live on a nail by an apartment door anymore. It lives in my pocket, where it belongs. Priscilla got the house. She got the savings, the weekends, the version of the story where she won everything worth winning. She never got the one thing that was never hers to ask for. And somewhere in a filing cabinet 2 counties over, a trust with my grandfather's careful handwriting on it still holds the one line neither of us ever saw coming. The line that starts with a key to a cabin she forgot, or maybe never even knew, existed.